Hello, hello, lovely to have you here. In today's video, what I want to discuss is the difference between nirvana on the one hand and enlightenment on the other. It's kind of a subtle difference. It's an important difference. It's a discussion I had a while back with Bhikkhu Bodhi, and it was clear to me during the discussion that I had mistaken here, that I had tended to think they were both the same thing. They obviously aren't. Again, subtle difference between the two of them, and he set me right. Now, maybe you already understand this, in which case, good for you. But I think if I had a question about it, if I was confused about it, I imagine a number of you will be as well. So I thought it's probably good for me just to make a video about it and explain the difference. Now, one key to the fact that there is a difference is in the words themselves, the words in Pali that are used to describe both of these. Nirvana literally means extinguished, as in the candle, a candle flame, or a fire, whereas the word for enlightenment is bodhi. Bodhi is translated various ways into English. It's translated sometimes as enlightenment, sometimes as awakening, sometimes as supreme knowledge. I did a couple of videos about an argument, a dispute between Bhikkhu Bodhi and Bhikkhu Analayo over the correct way to translate the word bodhi. I'm not going to get into that here, but basically we can see already that there is a slight difference in emphasis between extinguishment and awakening, or extinguishment and enlightenment. They seem like, in a certain sense, opposites. So in a nutshell, the difference is this, that it's the experience of, or access to nirvana that produces bodhi, that produces enlightenment. In a traditional understanding, nirvana is itself unconditioned. It's beyond change, beyond dukkha or suffering, but it's not beyond non-self. It is an example also of non-self. There are three famous verses in the Dhammapada, which is perhaps the most famous book of verses in all of early Buddhism, that go into this. They say, all conditioned things are impermanent. All conditioned things are suffering, or dukkha. But all things are non-self. The difference between the first two sentences and the third is that the first two sentences don't include the nirvana itself, the experience of nirvana. All conditioned things are impermanent, but nirvana is not conditioned. All conditioned things are dukkha, or suffering, but nirvana is not conditioned. However, all things are non-self. That includes nirvana. Now, what does it mean to say that nirvana is unconditioned, quote unquote? This is also something of a controversial point. I did a video about this very topic a while back, and the great Buddhist scholar and meditation teacher Bodhipaksa also has a blog post on the same topic that he came out with recently, and I'll leave a link to the blog post below in the notes in case you're interested in reading it. Both he and I come to basically the same kind of conclusion. Basically, nirvana means extinguishment. It is in particular the extinguishment of greed, hatred, and delusion. It's the extinguishment of craving, leading to the extinguishment of dukkha, or suffering. To that extent, it is an example of something that's unconditioned by all these things, unconditioned by greed, hatred, and delusion. It's a state that's unconditioned by craving, unconditioned by suffering. That's why it's unconditioned. Indeed, this extinguishment of suffering just is the third noble truth. And so this is all packed into the noble truths themselves. And as such, nirvana itself isn't a thing, it's rather the extinguishment of things. It's something that is itself, it is non-self, as we've already said. It doesn't have a self within it. It isn't a kind of a thing, rather it's the extinguishment of certain kinds of things. Indeed, nirvana isn't even properly described as an experience, as there's nothing that's experienced. As Sariputta famously said in one early sutta, the fact that nothing is felt is precisely what's pleasurable about nirvana. Nirvana is at times described nowadays as a kind of a non-conceptual experience. To me, describing it as a non-conceptual experience is just confusing, however, because all experience in Buddhism is understood as conceptual to some degree. All of our experience is conceptualized by our minds. That's just part of what experience is in Buddhism. And so the idea of a non-conceptual experience is kind of a contradiction in terms. But we get the point anyhow. So that's nirvana. Bodhi, on the other hand, is something quite different. Again, we can understand Bodhi as enlightenment, as awakening, as supreme knowledge. It's basically an understanding of these key Buddhist ideas, the ideas of the Four Noble Truths, of the Eightfold Path, dependent origination, of all the many kinds of views that are put out by the Buddha in the suttas. They are all conditioned beliefs, they're all views and opinions, but they're skillful ones that have come about through our experience of, through our passing through nirvana, or at least through the Buddhas having done so. That's the idea. It's the nirvana itself doesn't include the views. The views come after the exit from nirvana, when one sees the extinguishment of greed, hatred, and delusion, the extinguishment of the unskillful states. Then one sees how they came about, how this extinguishment came about. That produces produced in the Buddha an understanding of the Four Noble Truths, of the Eightfold Path, the way to the extinguishment of dukkha, and so on. And so we see here as the difference between nirvana and enlightenment is that nirvana is this experience of, if we want to call it, that's probably the wrong term, but anyway, a passing through the extinguishment of these unskillful states. Enlightenment is the conditioned awareness of the kinds of concepts and ideas that we should use to get this across, the concepts of the Four Noble Truths, of the Eightfold Path, and so on. If you're interested in more about this topic, I'll leave a link to my earlier video on the unconditioned, which should explain something more about these strange ideas of nirvana and awakening or enlightenment. Thanks so much to all of you. If you're getting something out of these videos of mine, consider taking a look at my Patreon page, which is linked down below and in the notes. And I hope we'll catch you in the next video. Meanwhile, all of you, be well.